At the beginning of the movie, we see a messy, disordered room. A frightened boy named Nick suddenly runs inside and locks the door. Grabbing a baseball bat for defense, he hears a loud bang on the door and notices a pair of feet visible through the gap beneath it. An old woman hauntingly calls out Nick's name before the feet move away, disappearing around the corner. Nick quickly locks the bathroom door from the outside. Suddenly, the bathroom light turns on, and the woman's voice urges him to let her in. The banging on the door grows louder. Terrified, Nick cries out, "Grandma, stop!" And then everything falls silent. He sees footsteps walking away and peers through the gap under the door. As he stands up, the closet door creaks open. His grandmother's eerie voice calls his name again. When Nick hesitantly approaches the closet, she suddenly pulls him inside. The scene ends with a book lying on the bed, titled The Doctor's Fetch.
Like, comment, subscribe to Recapss Horror.
The scene shifts, where Nick is now grown up with a family of his own. He has a young son, Jacob, and a wife, Charlie. Charlie is shown heading to work, and the family appears happy. Before leaving, she reminds Nick about the paperwork for his grandmother's house on his desk. The scene then cuts to Nick dressing Jacob. Later, Jacob is seen watching TV, while Nick keeps checking on him. Nick decides to paint his son's portrait, but continues checking on Jacob. He then notices the grant deed to his grandmother's house lying on his desk. Meanwhile, Jacob wanders upstairs. When Nick goes to check on him, Jacob is nowhere to be found. Jacob then enters his room and picks up a large pumpkin. His shoelaces are untied, and as he tries to come back downstairs, he trips and falls. Nick rushes toward him, screaming in horror. Jacob is no more now. Heartbroken, Charlie enters his room, looks around, sits on his bed, and begins to cry. Meanwhile, Nick hears her sobbing from downstairs. He opens the garage door to throw the trash in the bin. Suddenly, a figure appears behind him in the distance. He hears Charlie's voice, "Worthless. Do it." A hand grabs his shoulder from behind, and the scene cuts back to Charlie crying in Jacob's room. She hears rustling outside, and when she rushes to the window, she is horrified to see Nick attempting to hang himself, and the scene cuts to black. A month passes by, and we are introduced to Andrew, a psychiatrist assigned to Nick's case. After Charlie saved his life, Nick was placed in a state institution for treatment. The scene shifts to Charlie, bringing Nick to his grandmother's house. He sees his belongings are already there. When Nick asks about Charlie's things, she admits that she won't be moving in with him. Suddenly, the power goes out. As they continue talking, Nick sees a figure standing behind Charlie, but it vanishes in an instant. Just then, there's a knock at the door. It's Andrew. Nick asks why he's there. Andrew explains that by state law, Nick must be monitored. Nick insists he has Charlie for support, but Andrew reminds him that she won't be staying with him. That's why she hired Andrew. His role includes daily visits, general therapy, and some light hypnosis. Nick is visibly unhappy, saying he doesn't need any of this. But Andrew reminds him that his psychiatric evaluation tells a different story. He says, "You just spent a month in a state institution, and you need this." He hands Nick some medication and stresses that they need to make sure he'll be okay on his own. Nick angrily confronts Charlie for not telling him about this arrangement. After Andrew leaves, Nick tells Charlie he thought they were in this together. She removes her wedding ring, places it in his hand, and urges him to follow the treatment and learn to live with himself. She then walks away, leaving him behind. The scene cuts to Nick preparing to paint Jacob's portrait, recalling the moment he took his son's picture for it. Later that night, he takes his medication. As he's about to leave the room, he hears his grandmother calling his name. Startled, he looks out the window but sees nothing. As he turns away, scratching sounds echo against the window. He checks again and closes the blinds. Suddenly, someone grabs him. Nick jolts awake, realizing it was a nightmare. Later, he is seen with Andrew, insisting that he's fine. Andrew begins opening up about his own life, revealing that his daughter shot herself 3 years ago on Christmas Eve. He admits he told Charlie it wasn't a good idea for Nick to stay here alone, but she insisted, arguing that there are neighbors nearby. As Andrew speaks, he notices Nick jittering. Nick asks how he's supposed to help him. Andrew replies that his role is to remind Nick that while his mental health isn't his fault, it is his responsibility. He then says he has to leave. Outside, Andrew notices a rope tied from a tree. Just then, a neighbor waves at him. She introduces herself as Shelby and asks if the man inside is little Nick. Andrew asks if she knows him. Shelby says yes, though Nick wouldn't remember her. She mentions seeing Andrew visit and asks about it. Andrew lies, claiming Nick is selling the house, and asks if she knows anything about Nick's past. Shelby recalls that Nick moved there after his parents died in a car accident, and his grandmother passed a few years later from a heart attack. That's all she remembers, but she promises to think on it. Andrew gives her his card in case she recalls more, then leaves. Later, Nick realizes there's no food in the house, so he goes to the supermarket to get some groceries. There, he begins to have an anxiety attack, feeling uneasy, and decides to call Charlie. However, she is busy with work and doesn't answer his call. Just then, Nick notices the veins in his hand crackling. Back home, he is seen making cookies, remembering how Jacob used to help him with them. Afterward, he takes his medicine and looks at Jacob's photo. As he touches Jacob's face in the picture, it distorts. At that moment, he hears running footsteps. He goes out to check and sees Jacob upstairs, only for someone to instantly drag him away. Nick rushes upstairs, but just then, his grandmother passes by, calling his name. Suddenly, he hears her voice again, this time coming from downstairs, saying, "Take me." He sees her standing facing the wall, and when she turns her head upward, she starts laughing maniacally, startling him. Moments later, heavy footsteps approach, and to his horror, Nick sees a demonic version of himself, his fetch. Jacob appears beside the creature. His face distorted says, "Dad, I'm scared." Nick's fetch then throws Jacob down the stairs. In a desperate attempt to save him, Nick also falls down the staircase, and the scene cuts to black. Then we see Charlie listening to Nick's voicemail. He says he just wanted to call, that he knows she probably doesn't want to hear from him, and he apologizes before the message ends. The scene then shifts to Nick, frantically painting on a canvas. The next morning, Shelby and Andrew are seen together. Shelby tells Andrew about the night Nick's grandma died, the way Nick pounded at her door like something was after him. He could hardly get a word out. The few words he managed were grandma and the fetch. The next day, Shelby went to his house with a few neighbors to help clean, but the place was wrecked, furniture overturned, photos broken, and windows shattered. Later, Nick is sleeping in a chair and has haunting visions, voices calling him murderer and urging him to die. He wakes and momentarily hallucinates his hand, turning demonic before it returns to normal. Just then, there's a knock at the door, and next, we see Andrew helping him pack things from the old house. As they go to the attic, Andrew goes to fetch some books and hears a door close in the bedroom. He checks Nick's room and finds a chair wedged under the bathroom door. Meanwhile, Nick hears Charlie calling his name and notices a noose in the distance. He turns on the light and finds a normal rope hanging there. Then underneath an old sofa, he spots the fetch, startling him. Voices begin whispering, "Worthless, stupid, you should have died, it's all your fault, murderer, die." The scene cuts to Andrew, finding a book titled The Doctor's Fetch. Just then, Nick feels a demonic hand clutch his own before Andrew appears, asking if he's okay. Nick takes the book and flips through its pages, ignoring Andrew's questions. To Nick, Andrew's voice sounds demonic, though he's only asking what Nick is reading. Nick replies that it's something his grandmother used to read to him. Later, while leaving, Andrew urges Nick to talk because he can tell Nick hasn't been sleeping. Nick confesses, "I know it's only been a few weeks, but it feels like a year since the hospital, since the funeral. It also feels like it happened yesterday. When I found Jacob, I want to die every day, but I don't want to kill myself." Andrew asks him to explain the trip to the hospital. Nick says, "That wasn't me. I don't even remember hanging myself. All I remember is Charlie screaming. Then I woke up in the hospital. I put her through that." Andrew asks, after Jacob's accident when you cleaned the stairwell, "Was that you?" Nick admits it was. "I cleaned because it was my mess." He finally admits he's been hearing and seeing things and can't tell what's real anymore, then suddenly falls silent. Then Andrew shares his own story. He tells Nick he was out with a patient, running late as always, and knew his daughter Eliza would be angry, but he hoped to make it home for some kind of Christmas Eve dinner. She showed him how she felt right there under the mistletoe. Before leaving, Andrew offers to have dinner together that night, and Nick agrees. As Andrew goes, he tells him, "It will always feel like yesterday." Next, we see Nick painting Jacob's portrait when he suddenly hears the slinky bouncing. He turns and sees Jacob sitting there playing with it. Nick asks if he can tie Jacob's shoelaces. Behind him, the easel shifts, and Jacob's face in painting and photo is now grotesquely distorted. Jacob laughs, and running footsteps echo down the hall. Nick rushes into the bedroom and checks every photo of Jacob. In each one, the face is warped. From downstairs comes a nursery rhyme playing on the TV when Nick looks. He sees Jacob watching and enjoying. Nick approaches to talk to him, but the window glass shatters and the fetch smashes through, sliding toward Nick and laughing demonically. Nick screams and everything immediately goes silent. The scene cuts to Shelby cleaning the garden with her grandson. The boy spots someone at Nick's window and points. Shelby waves and calls out, but Nick stands motionless, showing no reaction. The scene then cuts to Andrew showing the doctor's fetch to Charlie. He explains that the lore says, seeing your fetch, your evil twin, is an omen of imminent death, when death is nigh upon its catch. A fellow soon shall see his fetch. He admits it sounds ridiculous, but a neighbor told him that when Nicholas was 10, he ran to her house during his grandmother's heart attack and screamed fetch. Charlie insists it's not real, just a story, but Andrew argues that myths like the Grim Reaper or the fetch can become real to someone who's scared enough. Nick read the story as a child. The trauma of his grandmother's violent heart attack may have planted the idea deep in his subconscious. Jacob's accident reopened that wound. Guilt triggered a traumatic response that tore his mind apart and may have brought the fetch back. Meanwhile, at home, Nick is having panic attacks and repeatedly smashing his head into the floor. Andrew continues, dissociation, self-harm, hallucinations, textbook schizophrenia. To outsiders, it may seem like just a story, but to Nick, it could feel real. That doesn't mean it's hopeless. If they diagnose him properly and get ahead of this with medication, time, and therapy, they can stabilize him long-term. At home, Nick struggles as voices blame him for everything and urge him to hang himself. He clutches Charlie's wedding ring, screams, and the scene cuts. We then see Nick cleaning the wound on his head. While fixing the broken window, he gets a call from Charlie. She asks how everything is, and Nick responds casually, though his changed behavior makes Charlie uneasy. Eventually, he says he's busy and ends the call. Next, Andrew arrives at Nick's house with food and runs into Shelby on the way. Nick watches them from the window before letting Andrew in. The scene cuts to the two of them eating pizza. Andrew notices bruises on Nick's hand, but Nick brushes it off. Andrew gently reminds him that Charlie is grieving too, and suggests that next time, he should ask her how she's doing. He then mentions that Shelby said she saw Nick staring out of his window earlier. Nick denies it, saying she must be mistaken, and sarcastically asks if this was supposed to be a guy's night or an interrogation. Andrew apologizes and hands him more medication, mood stabilizers and sleeping pills, advising him to start right away. In anger, Nick swallows the entire pack of sleeping pills. Andrew protests, saying he told him to take only one. Andrew then takes out his pocket watch to hypnotize Nick. He winds it, asking Nick to focus on the sound and close his eyes. Under hypnosis, Andrew tells him he has control. Nick suddenly begins to relive how his grandmother's fetch haunted him. Andrew asks what he sees. Nick describes his grandmother forcing him to look at her. Young Nick running away to Miss Shelby's house and banging on her door. He then says he needs to find Jacob, just as his fetch strangles and taunts him. Andrew urges him not to give up. "You are in control. Tell me you have control." The fetch mocks him with Jacob's voice, crying, "Daddy, help me." Andrew pushes him to fight back and counts down from 3. Nick snaps out of it. Overcome with grief, Nick breaks down. "I killed my boy. I can't see his face. I can't remember it. Charlie hates me." Andrew consoles him and helps him into bed, letting him rest. He then notices his bleeding finger and the bruise on his neck. Immediately, he calls Charlie and tells her that Nick has taken strong sleeping pills. He'll probably end up sleeping through the entire day tomorrow, but the situation is much worse than he expected. He says he'll stay the night to keep an eye on Nick, but insists that Charlie come and see him the next day. Later, he falls asleep, and in the morning, he wakes up to the sound of his daughter's voice.
You're still watching? Good. Like, comment, and subscribe to Recapss Horror.
The scene then cuts to Charlie arriving to visit Nick. As she enters, she sees a painting of Jacob that Nick has made. Nick then appears, and the scene shifts to them talking in the garden. Charlie notices bruises on Nick's body, but he brushes them off. She admits she made a rash decision, apologizes, and says she needs to find another place for him. Nick hushes her and asks what's on her mind. Through tears, Charlie says she misses Jacob and feels alone. Nick hugs her, but then he hears Charlie whisper, "You killed our boy." Nick replies, "I know I did. I'm sorry." Shocked, Charlie asks, "You did what?" Nick quickly changes the subject, suggesting they go out for lunch. She agrees. He says he's going to take a shower first, but then he spots his fetch in the distance. Inside the bathroom, Nick hears haunting voices blaming him for Jacob's death. His bones crack as his fetch taunts him. "Charlie hates you. She left you here to rot." Meanwhile, Shelby arrives at their home, and Charlie opens the door. She introduces herself and her grandson Bucky. From upstairs, Nick sees them and quickly gets dressed, but Charlie's ring slips and falls. He then comes downstairs and tells Shelby that they're going out, but his attention shifts when he notices Bucky playing. Mistaking him for Jacob, Nick calls out to him. He apologizes, picks him up, and begins to carry him away. Suddenly, Charlie slaps Nick, snapping him back to his normal state. Later, Charlie tells Nick that Andrew mentioned he's been seeing some sort of monster or a fetch, and that it might just be hallucinations. Nick suddenly snaps at her in anger. His bones crack and his fetch appears, urging him to die. It says, "She hates you. She left you here. Let me out." Suddenly, a mirror crashes down, and Nick yells at Charlie to get out of the house. As she leaves, he calms down and returns to normal. Regretful, he mutters to himself that he forgot to ask how she was. But then the voices return, telling him that Charlie left him to rot, that he's a terrible father, that the world doesn't need him. Tormented, Nick frantically searches for Charlie's ring while the voices echo in his head. Looking outside, he sees his fetch standing beneath a tree, pointing toward a rope tied to a branch. The voice taunts, "Jacob is waiting for you. Do it." Nick begins, losing control, consumed by hallucinations. Meanwhile, Charlie calls Andrew and tells him everything. Alarmed, he rushes from his house to meet her. Together, they enter Nick's darkened home. Inside, they find a noose hanging and disturbing branch-like paintings covering the walls. As they move deeper, they discover canvases filled with monstrous figures Nick has painted. Suddenly, Nick's voice calls from behind, and before they can react, someone drags Nick away. Startled, they see Nick standing with his face to the wall. He mutters, "It's time. He's here." Andrew tries to reason with him. "Nick, whatever you think you're seeing, it's not real." But Nick insists. "I'm ready." "He's here to help me," Andrew urges. "This is all in your mind. It's not real. You are real." Nick collapses, and his fetch growls before attacking Andrew, strangling him, then turning to Charlie. It lifts her by the throat, mocking. "Where were you, Mommy? Where were you when I fell?" Desperate, Charlie jams her thumbs into its eyes. At that moment, Nick pleads, "Take me. I'll do it." The fetch drops Charlie and moves toward him. They grapple at each other's throats until, slowly, the fetch vanishes. Charlie and Andrew gets up. Nick, exhausted, tells Charlie to leave, but she insists he can fight this. Nick says, "I don't know how," and collapses on his knees. Andrew quickly sets up a chair beneath the noose, urging Nick to finish it, promising him a proper send-off. Nick, trembling, smiles faintly as his fetch looks on with satisfaction. Under Andrew's guidance, Nick steps onto the chair, puts the noose around his neck, and Andrew begins hypnotizing him. Focus on the sound. Close your eyes. Nick drifts into hypnosis, Andrew asks. Where are you? Nick replies, the pumpkin patch. But everything's gone. There's a door. Suddenly, he finds himself inside his house again. He spots his fetch laughing. Then Jacob says, You broke my neck, Dad. Jacob walks upstairs. Nick whispers, I can't see his face. Andrew coaches him. It was an accident, Nick. Say it. Nick admits. He fell. Andrew assures him. It wasn't your fault. Nick follows Jacob to his room, where Jacob stands with his back turned. When he turns, his face is distorted. Nick says he can't remember his face. The fetch urges Nick to die so he can see Jacob clearly again. Overwhelmed, Nick apologizes to Jacob. Just then, Charlie starts reminding Nick of their son's details. He called pumpkins big oranges. His hair was light brown like yours as a kid. His cheeks rosy like mine. His eyes bright. The fetch roars for her to shut up, but she continues. He had freckles shaped like Orion's belt. You must forgive yourself. We have to let him go. Nick bursts into tears, hugging Jacob tightly, remembering all their happy moments. He finally sees Jacob's face clearly. Jacob hugs him back and whispers a secret in his ear. Nick gently tells him to go play, letting him go. And Jacob leaves. Back in hypnosis, Andrew asks, Are you ready to come back? But Nick still searches for his fetch. Suddenly, he hears his grandmother's cruel laughter. Without warning, the fetch slips the noose around Nick's neck and tries to push him over the railing. Andrew shouts, encouragement. Fight back, Charlie urges. You can beat this, Nick. Nick rips the noose from his neck, slips it over the fetches, and hurls it over the railing. The creature drops, hanging. Andrew asks, Nick, are you in control? Watching the fetch die, Nick finally declares, I am in control. Andrew counts down from 3, and Nick snaps back to reality. He yanks the noose from his neck, thanks Andrew, and hugs Charlie. The scene cuts to Nick and Andrew in a session. Andrew shares a memory about a pillow his daughter Eliza made. She was almost 19, and the day before she died, she had told him the funniest joke. He admits they were so close, yet he still missed all the signs. With emotion, Andrew tells Nick, I'm so proud of you. I've battled those demons too, and they're just like bullies. If you stare them in the eye, they cower and run. Nick thanks him and leaves. In the final scene, Nick shows Charlie Jacob's final painting. She smiles, saying it's perfect. But in the reflection, we see Nick's fetch still lurking, alive. With this, the movie ends. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the chills, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a scare. Until next time, stay spooky.